back. Welcome back to Eunoia. It's your host, Sable Danielle, and today we have a special guest, Takiyah Butler. Hi, Takiyah.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Would you like to start off by telling us who you are and what you represent?
Sure. So my name is Takiyah. It's kind of like tequila, but without the Y. Takiyah is Arabic for righteous. So that name is really important to me. And so that kind of focuses how I do my work. So my life purpose and then the way that shows up, I really focus on helping people get through storms and figuring out ways to persevere through really hard things. So I do that for communities, organizations, and individuals. So that boils down to strategic planning, facilitation, coaching, really helping people over time to build the skills they need so that they can keep going because change work is very hard, whether it's for yourself or for others. So kind of having somebody along in that fight who's familiar with kind of sort of how to survive that and how to thrive in that, that's what I do for a living. And I would lastly say, because I don't want to ever not say it, that I kind of operate on three principles of grace, integrity, and love. So everywhere that I go, I try to be a person who presents balance to that room, creates safe space in that room. And the way that I accomplish that is by showing up with grace for myself and for others, integrity, meaning I'm authentic and vulnerable, and then love, meaning I try to build and not destroy.
I love that. Those are three things that I stand by myself as well. I feel like integrity is very important, and I feel like I move through love all the time. I'm a Libra. If anyone's into astrology, or if you're into astrology, I'm like Libra all through my chart.
So I'm
But
a
I,
Sagittarius, so I feel like as a Sagittarius, it's never anything nice. So I just don't pay attention to it. Like we're either like a flight risk or like
yeah,
something spacey. So yeah.
that's funny. I have a Sagittarius moon, so maybe that's part of the reason why we connect a little bit.
Definitely.
And going into that, I met you through Ashley Burney. We both spoke at the YBIB experience in October, and I really liked your energy. I felt like we resonated on a couple of different things. So that's why I initially asked you to be on the show. And I feel like we both have the same mission, which is helping people grow, helping people change. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Excited.
So we're going to start with just pulling a random question. I'm going to close my eyes and just pull. And if you feel comfortable answering it, you can answer it, and then I will also answer.
Sounds like a plan.
So, all right.
Again.
I have it in the other season. Sorry. Okay, let's try again. Okay, so it says, if you could live anywhere, where would it be and why?
If I could live anywhere, I would live in Belize because it is a really beautiful place to live. It has a pretty steady weather, and because of the coral reefs, I think it's like the last living largest coral reefs, and so it doesn't have hurricanes, none of those things. So it feels like a pretty steady place to lay my head. So I like have been thinking about that one for a while.
That's interesting. I was going to say, you like really had that answer.
Mhm. Yeah, and my Facebook memories today was everything about the time I went to Belize, and I'm like, yeah, I gotta. All right, this is a reminder to figure this out.
Oh, so maybe it's time, like, it's time to manifest this for you. If I had, I haven't really thought about that. So I've worked the last couple of years, honestly, trying to get to Vegas, and so I'm here, and it feels like home to me, and so it feels like a longer term place. If I were to pick somewhere tropical, I really haven't done my research, but everything in my head is saying Costa Rica because the weather. Yeah, the weather. So
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
All
Well,
right.
I mean, you know what? There's something to be said for being where you want to be already, and a question like that bringing you gratitude. So, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank all right. So let's get into it. First, we can talk about the YBIB event. Like, how was your experience there?
It was cool. It was interesting, like on a lot of levels for me. But I think the event itself was really beautiful. The I don't often go to women's empowerment events, and all I ever hear when I hear a women's empowerment event is someone like making fun of it or say that it's not something to do. And so it felt like for that to be my first time in that space, it didn't feel like what everyone said it was going to feel like. And that's not to say it was perfect. People are people. And but I didn't have any negative experiences myself. I don't want to speak for everybody else's experience. So that's why I give the caveat. But it felt like genuinely people wanted to root each other on and wanted to know what other people were doing. And it was like this interesting mix of women who did look like you, who didn't look like you, who had these overarching things. Every time someone got off a panel, it was beautiful to see so many other women take them by the side. Like whoever had like the moment they cried on stage, that person got like taken to a corner, and all you see is like hands shaking their hands, like I love you, you're doing good. And I
Yeah.
think that's what you go to those types of spaces for. So that next to hiking, next to I hadn't been back to Vegas in 3 years. It was a really like emotional experience for me. But it started out in such a grateful way because of like starting at the conference. So I enjoyed it.
That's good. I had the same experience. I felt like the room was filled with so much love and support and just non-judgmental energy. Like everybody felt like they were literally there to just be open and receive and learn and share and grow from the entire experience. And it was really lovely to see. Especially like you said, it was a diverse group of people, a diverse group of women, and there were a couple men in the crowd. So nice to see that.
I felt bad I by accident brought a man. I was like, oh, we gotta whisk you out of here.
Hopefully he didn't feel too uncomfortable, but I'm sure hope he got some takeaways from it because growth is for everyone, empowerment for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. That was another, actually, let me speak to the age gaps or the age differences there, which is really beautiful. So this is my assistant I'm talking about, and he's 21. So for him, it was a whole nother level of, wow, look at all these adults in this space doing beautiful things, having their own businesses. To your point, yeah, he absolutely took something away from it because he's also a little younger. So it was like this whole other added benefit of all these different ages in the room too.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that and happy that he got some takeaways. I'm glad we all got some takeaways. So,
Absolutely.
when you were on stage, you mentioned that music is very important to you. One of the things that stuck out to me was you mentioned Nipsey. I always listened to Nipsey, and he was a huge part of my growth when I first started changing and trying to become a better person. And although I don't claim to be any type of street person, I don't feel like you need to be a street person to resonate with him and understand the message in his music. If you can get past, the cuss words, if that's something that bothers you. So,
All the
how did
time.
you say?
I said I curse all the time, so it doesn't bother me, but I echo you.
Yeah, I don't mind it either, but I know some people may watch it and or listen to it and be bothered by it. But why is music so important to you, and how has it helped you on your journey?
Yeah, so I thought that at 15 I would have a Grammy. That was like my original life plan was to be a singer or songwriter. And I've always been like a writer of some sort. So my parents would buy me stationery, they would buy me art sets. I knew I wanted to be an artist. And then I knew within art I wanted to play with words and sounds and music. So it's that type of important for me. The same way a kid goes to music class and has instruments. I was in gospel choir and the choir at school, and all those things, really, even before I became an athlete or any other label that seems more fitting now. That one was always like my root one. Um, to this day, I have this thing I call like having your exit process. So, like when you leave a hurtful situation, you have the right to make something beautiful out of it. And so, I think one of the easy ways for me to do that is through music. So, so I got out of a tough relationship and I made an album. Like, I made like 6 songs. Like, they weren't like, they didn't have the whole thing, the whole components of the song, but they were like 6 solid musical poems about how I felt about the situation. And so it's always been a way for me to very concisely. I'm not a person who was always comfortable talking about my life experiences or talking about things. And music felt like a really good way to succinctly say a lot in a little bit and to use your creativity to be really choosy about what you put into this prose and really having to think about everything together and not just the line. So what music became for me was like a framework. So I think about everything through the lens of music, in the fact that a song has a chorus, a hook, it has has all these things, or the way the music and the sound itself is composed. I see it as like the perfect representation of a bunch of different things playing on top of each other to make something new. But in reality, it's like the first thing I feel like I ever really knew, and it's the thing that I feel like I'm fake. Whatever I'm doing is the close second to me being on stage with Beyonce and getting my Grammy.
That's great. I feel like you explained that on a very deep level and perspectives that I never really thought about it, because although I love music, I'm not a musician. I was in chorus in like seventh grade, but that's pretty much the extent of it. And me singing in the shower and like pretending I'm in a concert in my car, like. But I love the deeper perspective that you give. For me, when I listen to music, it's more about the story that people tell, because I believe that there's a story and emotions, and hopefully in most songs and music. And so I try to take away that and the lessons and just gain perspective. But I like what you said in the beginning about how you had to release after you had your breakup. You said you wrote like 6 songs as you wrote your album. And I think that's important to talk about, because we go through these things and we need to have some type of release, a healthy release, not just some type of toxic release. So for me, it was writing, but I never made music. I just like to journal, and I kept that to myself because you was private before I started my podcast.
That's how it goes, I think, for everybody. It's like you get the light on the inside and then you kind of like show it a little, like, over time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. And I would say it's not even I would add, yes, and um, making something beautiful is really about the creativity of it and allowing yourself to like find freedom through making something out of what you have. So if all you have are bricks, if all you have are feathers, if all you have is whatever's left from the rubble, then like you can still create something out of that. And whatever you create is a sandcastle in the sense that it's not permanent and it's not forever. So that's why I like making songs, because it's not like I don't plan on making $1 million off the song I write. Maybe one day afterwards, I always think like people are going to find all my journals and be like, dang, yeah, let's put this someplace. I pray, right? So like I write a little extra clearly.
Well, you have to believe in yourself, right?
Right, exactly. Like one day I'm gonna do something, but until then, all the songs are just ways for me to practice letting go, for me to practice expressing myself, for me to do it in a way that doesn't hurt somebody else. And even in the song or even in the music or whatever I'm writing, I try to write it in a way that comes to a healed conclusion. So no matter what I'm expressing in it, I try to be true to where I end up landing at the end of it, because I don't want to create things that just like are mirrored in the sadness of stuff. So
Right. I think that's really important too. And I think I struggled with that with doing my podcast, because I learned so many lessons in the toxicity of life and my relationship. Like I want to talk about it and help people like learn from it, but I also don't want it to feel like I'm stuck in it, because I'm definitely not stuck in it. You can't get stuck in those things. You have to, feel it, learn from it, and like evolve and grow. So it's like there's a fine line of me talking and being like comfortable with sharing and be like, okay, well, am I beating a dead horse? How many times have I talked about this?
You know what's so funny about that? Like, especially if you're using multiple channels to tell the same story, it's like it's always humbling how much people listen and how much people don't listen. So like in your mind, right? You're like, I told you all. You'll remember the days I told you about this thing. And I'm like, I don't know what you were talking about, because they weren't online that day or they didn't see that thing or whatever else. So like the beauty of your story is how it unravels like an onion. And so every time you look at the same thing, you can see different things in it than you saw before. The book Native Son, I read that book for the first time when I was like 7, and I had to stop reading it because it was so scary for me to read at 7. Like a girl gets killed, her body gets put in a furnace. It's a lot for a 7-year-old. And so I've come back over time, and now I make a habit of it, and I go back and I read the book. And every time I've read the book in a different state of my life, I've seen different things that I didn't see before. Like I've noticed, wow, the mom really represents this type of person, or like, well, I didn't notice this part of the book. And the artist maybe didn't even mean to make all those things. But over time, I'm looking at it with the lens of who I am. So it's like, it's cool to see and get whatever I get from it. But at this point now, I'm recognizing how far I've come and how I see it differently. So I feel like you can still hold the same thing, but hold it differently and come up with new stuff in it, so long as you're like authentically growing in that process.
Yeah, that's a very great point and a good way to think about it and go forward with sharing stories, especially like you said, on different platforms or even just having different interviews. Like I have a different podcast interview every week. I don't want to talk about the same thing every week, but you're right to touch upon different growth aspects is very important.
Mhm.
So another piece of how we connected was you mentioned that you were in a toxic relationship that really impacted your life. And I think it's important to not just share my story, but to have other people share their stories to resonate with whoever needs to hear the story. So you don't have to go into full details, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. But if you want to give us a short rundown of your story, and then we can add other questions later.
Yeah, sure. So, it's funny because I know the relationship we're referencing in the conversation, but I feel like I should say that it's a part of a string of toxic relationships. So, I don't know that it's even more or less toxic than some other ways I experience toxicity. So, I'll speak to the overall pattern first and say that generally what I've experienced has been a lot of emotional and mental abuse. I've had experiences where I've experienced like physical abuse, but it was very much on the early end. My saving grace has been that I'm a runner. So like my commitment issues have probably kept me out of situations that in retrospect I should have never been in. So that's been hard because for a while I struggled with like whether I left something that was truly toxic or whether I left something that was dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So where I feel like the relationship we're talking about is toxic is where I was in a relationship with someone who was incredibly narcissistic and I was incredibly codependent. I experienced a lot of gaslighting, a lot of questioning my reality, a lot of a lack of communication, which might lend itself more to dysfunction. Except there were times when this person was absent in my life in ways that were traumatic. So a short story, I ended up getting a blood clot because at that point in my life, thought, okay, well, if I have a baby, though, it'll save this relationship that I moved across the country for, that I gave up all the things that I had built in Miami from scratch, that I would give up all these things and I moved across the country. I ended up in this relationship and I thought, well, this is when I'm supposed to have a kid. This is when I'm supposed to have a baby. I'm supposed to do this. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to save a relationship, but that I was performing what I thought femininity was. So that's where like, I have to take responsibility for the relationship being toxic. And so I started to have certain expectations that I put on myself about how I thought I was supposed to perform and what I thought I was supposed to do that I wasn't ready for either. And I don't think that he was.
Mm.
Um, in other ways, he was still battling and dealing with lust and accountability and responsibility and seeing and recognizing somebody else, which is all the things that you're going to probably never get from a narcissist. Um, so also experienced a lot of partner sexual abuse. So a lot of intimate partner sexual abuse. So the hard part about it was that we had this really intense like sex life, but there was no ability for me to say no. And when I said no, it was ignored. Or there would be these moments where it felt like where I felt like an object and not like a person, and where I felt like I'm living and playing a role that I felt like was like dehumanizing a part of me. And I don't think that that was him. That's the part where it's like I struggle with if it was toxic or if it was dysfunctional. And I also am to acknowledge the word toxic is being used so much that I feel like I should define it right now. so, so I would say toxic is anything can be toxic if it's too much. And so too much is relative to the pot that it's being put in. And for me, now I can say that there was a certain amount of freedom. There was a certain amount of urban living. Like I didn't want to live in a suburban space. There were all these preferential things that I didn't know until I got into that situation mattered to me. And I didn't know how to, um, I didn't believe I was with a partner who cared that I had different wants and I had different needs. And I felt like when I committed to coming to the city to investing in this relationship, it was like a rug almost automatically got pulled from under me. And so once I got close, I got to see, well, you're I'm trying not to tell somebody else's business, which I think is
Yeah.
hard. And this is why narcissistic relationships are so unhealthy, because you tend to be most often, a lot of women who are codependent, or a lot of folks who are codependent, are also the folks who don't want to tell somebody else's business, who are dealing with the embarrassment of whatever that they experience, but also really cared about the person that they were with. So balancing your story, and without feeling like you're telling somebody else's story, or you're condemning somebody else, or you're making them into this villain in the world. I want to give him a chance to grow in this world too. So I don't want to make him sound like he was a villain. But I think the toxicity was an account to what I truly do believe is narcissistic behavior. But also, I think I was someplace that I deeply did not want to be. And my journey was like being okay with that and allowing myself to walk away. And when I walked away, I had to then spend a lot of time investigating why I even ended up in that relationship in the first place, because it was really part of a larger pattern.
Yeah.
So I think a summary for me is like, if every room you walk into smells like shit, it's probably you, and you should probably take a shower. But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean you deserved anything that happened, or that those situations themselves are okay. Nor does it mean that anybody has to play the villain. It's taken me like 5 years to explain that way.
No,
Grad
no,
therapy.
I think that was great. You touched on so many different things that I want to come back to, and I hope that I don't forget. Because basically, I feel like you're mirroring everything that I went through. Even when you stopped to say, this isn't my story, I don't want to tell his story, I was even like, well, when I talk, I don't want to share his story. Like, I believe that we were both in a similar relationship with people who had things that they needed to work on, and the relationship became narcissistic, whatever. But throughout those things, we still have a story to tell, and it's also important to be able to have our voice. But I think that it's very respectable that we are both trying to respect the boundaries of everyone else and just realize that it's our story, our part of the story to tell as well. You know.
Yeah, and let me add too. So, wow, look at accountability. So earlier today, I was making all these things about how I think older women need to be more honest about their flaws. And so I'm going to be honest about my flaws, which is that I was dealing with a lot of anger and frustration with him. We had a long relationship. So I came into this as almost like an attempt to heal over a really deep cut from a very long time ago. And one thing I realized in therapy was the first thing my therapist told me was like, think about your emotions like a bank account. And every time somebody does, you probably heard this too, like every time somebody does something to you, they withdraw from this bank account. And so the point though is that at some point they also need to be depositing as well. And you can get to a point where someone's withdrawn so much money that they could never repay that back, that there's nothing they can do. Like if they've taken $1 million, but they only make $10 a day, there's nothing that they're going to be able to do to repay the things that they've done. And so you just have to cut your losses and move on. I remember that day in therapy, and I remember crying and being like, okay, that's the reality. Before we ever even walked into this phase, we should have never walked into it, because I was already dealing with the grief. Um, his I was very mad that I felt like someone made a promise to me and took it away, as well as feeling like someone was like disrespecting my womanhood in ways that I found my boundaries in the toxic relationship, if that makes sense. So I found my boundaries. And then I got really angry, and I would like smash stuff. I hit a vacuum into the door. I did a lot of things that I'm super not proud of. And in his story, I might be crazy, which is totally reasonable because I was very mad. And so it's kind of like it's toxic for both of us. Like this is not a healthy situation. And I've said it in personal spaces and maybe not so much in public, but I felt like one of us was gonna die and one of us was gonna go to jail. Like that's what it felt like. Like if we stayed in that situation, like um I would have continued to try to resist what was happening, and he would have continued to try to persist, or vice versa. And it would have ended up with one of us just not being in a good situation. So I'm grateful for it happening, because it made me have to confront myself in a lot of ways. And like before, the idea of being abused and being angry don't seem like they go together. But now I understand that they're very much two sides of a trauma coin. So it's the fact that you're in trauma. It's not so much that you're an imperfect person because you did these things when you were in trauma. So it's been a lot of work to get here, but I definitely won't make it seem like I was like this daisy or flower that was like, getting plucked and manipulated in his space. I loved him. I cared about him. I think he loved and cared about me too. But the way we interacted with each other had way too much dirt on it, and it just wasn't any way for us to clean that at some point. So.
Yeah. And I think that's very important to talk about because so often people leave relationships, whether it's friendships or love relationships, and it's always the other person who is the bad person. But in
Yeah.
all reality, like we all have things to work on, nobody's perfect. And really, it was just two unhealed, two broken people trying to make something work and not knowing how to do it. And then just ending up breaking each other even more and more and more. And it's just this toxic cycle. And like you said, you thought that either someone was going to go to jail or die, vice versa, whoever, and like that's that was like my breaking point. Like nobody ended up going to jail, but my wake up call was passing out because I was so stressed that I wasn't eating and I was losing weight and I was just like unhealthy, like completely. And the universe had to knock me on my ass to wake me up. But that also goes to say, like, how long was your relationship?
So the being in Vegas, so 2015 until, and then like spittling into 2018, like little efforts. So I would say that we met in 2005. So we dated 2005, 2006, and then now again until 2015, 2018. So there
Yeah.
was a lot of like friend time in between that made that relationship feel like the love I had was 12 years worth of love, but the experiences I had were very short, and I was hoping for all the growth in between to be enough.
Yeah. So, okay, hold on. I'm probably going to forget one thing. But that goes back to bring me back to say that, first of all, it takes us a long time to realize and even recognize or accept that we are even in an unhealthy relationship or environment. And then I'm not sure if your blood clots or whatnot was your wake up call, but why does it have to be that extreme for us to recognize, damn, maybe we shouldn't be here? Why haven't
Yeah.
we listened to our emotions? We didn't listen to any triggers, no red sign or no red flags. We didn't listen to anything, even though they were all there.
Well, you didn't know that they were red flags. And that's like the greatest thing that therapy's given me was just like the moments to like cry and process that. And then, it's crazy. Like, I remember at one point being in therapy and being like, but like, am I the narcissist? Like, every person goes, but is it me? Like, is this some sort of like inception thing where I wake up and I'm the villain? And she was like, first of all, narcissists never ask if they're narcissists. So that's usually a good sign that you're not. And I'm like, okay. So in time, I understand now the reaction I have to my realizations reminds me of my heart posture. And so every time I realized, like, I remember he would make this comment of like feeling like he couldn't do anything right. And I remember the day in therapy when I finally understood what he meant, what he could possibly have meant when he said that. And I remember crying and being in real legitimate tears and being like, oh man, that sucks. I really hope I do better for the next person. And like really being able to sit in and process those like grief moments where like I'm coming to certain realizations too. That it's hard and it sucks because like I don't want to feel like I'm trying to like advocate or absolve somebody from responsibility or absolve anybody from their own personal choices. But I think like we have to start asking ourselves what real healing looks like, and like a healing that allows you to still be in a world where that person could possibly do well. Like there's a world where that person is going to succeed. And what do you do in your heart when that happens? Are you happy for them and wishing them well, but still wanting your distance? Are you mad? Are you praying for their downfall? Like, how are you showing up? What does trauma do to your body? I think it's something that becomes like a really separate thing from that person. And so the more that I started to do that, it was like there was more than enough work in me to deal with to ensure that I would be able to see those red flags better in the future. But in that moment, I didn't know that that was a problem. I thought because that's the patterns I had in my head from my background, which is work that I had to do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, well, for me, it was my first like relationship that I really felt longevity, love, like this is it, we're going to get married. And so I think that you go into it thinking, this is what love looks like for me, like, but I didn't really know. All I knew was that my parents were together and they were happy, and my brother-in-law, my sister were happy, and I've seen them, and I knew what I wanted to feel, but I didn't know how to attain that feeling. And I also don't think I knew how to give that as well. I think I was all about love languages. I was trying to learn about love languages, but I also didn't recognize that I was talking to him about love languages, but I wasn't loving him in his love language. And
Mhm.
so you have to love someone else in their love language, and they have to love you in your love language in order for it to work. You can't be like, well, I'm doing all this because I love you, and they don't receive that love because that's not how it speaks to them, you know?
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure, for sure. That's the danger with like, so I like dabble in the world of self help, but I don't really want to be in that world. But I think it's a necessary world, especially for people who can't afford therapy or who can't afford certain things. Like the Yanla goes a long way on YouTube if you don't have access to mental health services. It's not a supplement, or
Right.
it's not a replacement rather. But I think I think recognizing the stories you tell yourself is like a really important part of your healing process, because when you lay it out, you can really ask yourself like, well, what is true? What isn't? What does this look like? One of the best things my therapist also told me was that relationships are like mirrors. And so you can pick this belief up, I think, when you feel like it and not when you don't. Like, that's how I feel about this thought. But so if relationships are like mirrors, then there's something that is attracting you to this other person. I've been historically attracted to emotionally unavailable men because I have been emotionally unavailable, which is why I've been such a runner. So of course I end up with them, but it turns out that I do want to be loved. Being emotionally unavailable is not like a character trait, it's just a habit I've picked up, and it's a trauma response. So what happens if I do the hard work of becoming vulnerable? What happens if I do the hard work of trusting people? And what would it require to be able to do that work? Because that work is more important than him or anybody else or anything else. It's just necessary work. I think that's your life's work, is the
Right.
work you do to be a complete version of yourself. So I had to get better people around me. I had to set better standards for myself. There's like a lot of breaking down and retooling I had to do to be able to even create an environment where I could start to show up the way I wanted to show up. I literally had to move back home, like move back across the country, leave Las Vegas and move all the way back to New York, because what I knew was guaranteed here was a huge family that would love and pour into me and would protect me in a way that I didn't get while I was being a nomad out in the world by myself.
Right.
So I knew for this season that I think I'm coming to the end of, but for this season I needed almost like the recoiling of coming back to people who love you, so you can like store some energy up. That way when you go back out into the world, you go out a little bit more assured, because the trauma of that relationship really had me like questioning myself in some really, really deep ways.
Yeah. So can we talk about that a little bit deeper? Because I was going to ask you what your healing journey was like. And when you were talking, although our stories and like journeys are very similar, your healing process was complete opposite of mine. And so I believe we both come from a very large family that's around the same area. I left mine there in Illinois. I still love them dearly, but I love warm weather as well.
Amen.
But after I went through my whole trauma, even during it, like I isolated, and afterwards I isolated, and that was probably also a trauma response. But rather than relying on them for support, I needed to isolate myself completely so that I could restart. Like I needed to figure out what went wrong, why it went wrong, what went wrong in me and him, like where did everything come from, and I needed to start from a clean slate. And I think that I needed to do that because I love my family. I'm such a people pleaser. I care very much about their opinions, but I didn't want to rebuild myself based off of other people. I wanted to rebuild myself based off of me and then still reach out for their support. I'm still working on being able to receive support, not from them, but within myself, because I don't know how to receive. So, like a lot of my healing journey was just writing, isolating writing, and just kind of growing. So, yours was moving back home and relying on your family.
It wasn't. So, but let me, before I answer my question, let me say what I heard in my head when I was listening to you.
Okay.
So, what I heard in my head was that you just said the same thing two different ways. So, you said you like being by yourself, and you said you struggle with receiving love.
Yes.
And so I actually started my journey the same way you did. So 2018, it was like fake quarantine. Like I basically worked at home all day. I was in Vegas, but like, working alone. I'd left my job, started a contract. Um, and a lot of my healing work happened then. Like a lot of it. I pretty much just stayed at home all day. I went to the gym. I had my little Samsung Health app. I lost like 30 something pounds in that season. It was a lot of just like focusing and honing in. Um, the the coming home was not to continue to heal. The coming home was because I had built this system that I didn't want to take out into the world and get beat around again. And I mean that in my professional world, because what I've also come to see is how I also pick work partners and workspaces, just like I used to pick relationships. So I've had to like really deal with my people pleasing across all boards to your point, and including in my family. Because like everything you're saying is true for me too. But what I've tried to embrace now that I've gone through a lot of the I work is how to be in better relationship with other people, because I struggle with receiving too. And it's funny how trauma it's literally, when people are like, oh, that ain't nothing but the devil. It really is, in the sense of like trauma makes you do the opposite of what you need.
Yeah.
Like trauma makes you go do something that is not a solution. It is like it's pain management, but it's not actually a solution. This past year, I had like a professional stress and some like personal ones. It was like the magnitude of the person was like 80 little balls and then a really big one, and it was my family, my community, people who had known me since I was a kid. They all circled around me in ways that also taught me how to circle around people too, because of the way that they loved me and like allowed me to be broken in front of them. And so now after I was able to do that, it's funny because now in relationship with like strangers, coworkers, whatever, people that I don't know well, I'm laughing, I'm joking, I'm vulnerable now because I know that they're my acquaintances. And when it's time to cry and when it's time to stress, when it's time to something, I do have somebody in this Rolodex of people that showed up when I need them, who I can truly be myself with, and they accept me as myself. So I don't have to be afraid of who I am. And so what if I try to start being that in other spaces too? So it's like part two maybe of the healing, but it wasn't where I started. I definitely was alone by myself. I had a roommate for a while, who moved in, but we were breaking up for a really long time, like really breaking up for a long time. And I for a it wasn't until my blood clot, which was in 2017, which really made me think about the type of man I would want to be, the father of my children. And if I was in an emergency and you didn't come and check on me, what would you do if my child was in a situation? Could I trust that you would be there? And I had never thought legacy before. So the same way that like this man was the first time, to your point, I thought future. I had never thought like future. Like, okay, but like who's my child gonna be? And if I have a child with this person, am I gonna be mad and regret it and treat this child in a way that I wouldn't even want to treat a child because I have resentment of the situation I chose to have the child in?
Wolfpack, that wraps up part one of our interview with Takiyah Butler. I hope you all enjoyed our conversation for today. Make sure you tune in next week for part two. Peace and love. Stay safe.